We're going to start with wholesaling. So I have, and I don't want to go too late, I've got about 25 minutes, 27 minutes. And this is really enough time. So I'm going to talk about two strategies, wholesaling and then flipping. And you will understand them enough to grasp the concept and decide if that's something for you. So here are the steps in the wholesale process. The wholesaler has an executed purchase and sale agreement with a seller. Does everybody understand that? If you're going to wholesale a property, you have a purchase and sale agreement, a contract with a seller. The wholesaler assigns their rights within that purchase and sale agreement for a fee. So I have the contract and I give it to somebody for a fee. The wholesaler becomes the assigner, because I am assigning it. And the buyer, typically an investor, becomes the assignee. The assignee purchases the property from the seller, not the wholesaler. And I'm going to show you a little diagram here. Typically, the wholesaler never owns the property. And I have to say this now, and some of you are going to be surprised, some of you already know, but selling real estate without a license is against the law. Okay? And I know what some of you are thinking, but if I have a contract on the property, I have equitable interest, so that makes it okay. It's going to get interesting. Selling your rights within a contract is not against the law. If you can prove your intent to purchase the property, if you cannot prove your intent to purchase the property, you may be seen as selling real estate without a license. So, let me say that in different words. If what you do is find somebody who needs to sell their house, that's desperate, and you put a contract on it, and you go out and you assign your rights to that contract and sell it, and that's your business model. I'm finding somebody who needs to sell, finding a buyer, putting that together. If you didn't know any better, that sounds an awful lot like a real estate agent, right? Guess what? That's selling real estate without a license. If you understand what this says, this is selling, or if you can't prove your intent to purchase the property. So if your business is flipping and you're always generating leads and you have too many deals in the pipeline, too many properties, yes, you can unload them. Just understand that first bit. You can't be a realtor without being a realtor. You can be an investor without being a realtor, but you can't be a realtor without being a realtor. So that is the red hot news for the night that Bill Dolan will go into a little deeper. But I can't neglect telling you that up front. I'm sure you're going to have questions. We'll definitely cover it. So here's a picture of what a wholesale transaction looks like. You have the seller, A, the wholesaler, B, and the investor, presumably and typically, this C person is the person flipping the house, renovating and reselling, and then it would go finally to a homeowner. So here's how it works. The seller and the wholesaler do a contract, a purchase and sale agreement. Then the wholesaler will move that over to the investor with an assignment agreement. So it goes from A to C, and then eventually the homeowner would buy it from the investor. Does anybody have any questions on that transaction, how it moves down the road like that. It's kind of simple, but go ahead.
Is this only with property that's not listed on the MLS?
Normally.
What's the question?
Is this with property that's not listed on the MLS? And the answer is normally. And the reason is that if it's listed and there's a realtor representation, generally that realtor is not going to want to see a potentially unstable situation for the seller. Nor does that realtor want to endorse that seller taking that sale amount when that person who has it under contract is about to sell that contract and make, let's say, 10 grand more. So if you can understand that, you'd understand pretty much why it doesn't happen with getting a property from the MLS. But that doesn't mean it can't happen. So, for example, let's say you made an offer on a property that was listed, and let's say it was listed for 80 and you offered 45. And the seller said, no way. And the realtor said, I agree. I'm glad you didn't take that. It's not necessary. And then you said, well, my offer stands. If you decide that this would be acceptable at any point, let me know and I'll come save you. So if that seller understands this is like my ticket out, my easy button if things get bad, then that could work. But generally speaking, these kind of transactions don't work well through a realtor. There are cases where the property is like a short sale or an REO or a HUD property, and people creatively wholesale those deals. And it's typically done by selling the entity rather than the property. But that's kind of a little rabbit trail, but that's kind of the MLS game. So everybody got this down pat? All right. So here are the benefits to wholesaling. You can quickly dispose of inventory, and that could be that you are disposing of the property itself or the contract. So it is still considered a wholesale. If you buy it, you close on it, and then if you decide, I need to get out of this, and you sell it to another investor, it's technically a wholesale if it's not being sold to the end user. You're still in the middle. Another reason is the profits. So it's not uncommon to make $5,000 or $10,000 or more on a wholesale. I've made as little as a few hundred. I've made over 60. You just get lucky sometimes. But typically, 5, 10, 15 grand. And I would say even, I'd say over the past year, I've had a lot of 20s also. And that's not ripping off the guy next in line either. All right, having equitable interest in a property is another benefit through a contract that allows you to control it without ownership. So when you wholesale the property, you don't own it. You have a contract on it, therefore you have control over it. Depending on the type of agreement, this could be a long-term thing. It could be an option agreement. But it's really cool if you put down $500 and now you're controlling this asset. And low to no money in, it's kind of what I just said. All right, let's talk about the C player. Okay, so this is the seller A, you as the wholesaler B. These are the C investors. These are the people that you would sell your deal to, and they would presumably be renovating and reselling it. When it comes to those people, building a professional, trustworthy relationship is extremely important. So if you're a wholesaler and you're kind of limping along and you're not demonstrating these kind of things, you can have a great deal, but it's going to be very hard for you to sell it. And if you don't think your reputation gets around quick, well, I think most of the people in the room know that's the case. The idea of the buyers list, your list of potential buyers, is very, very important. There's kind of the two different perspectives on this. So, is the list important? Yes and no. Why is it important? Because if you have a good deal, but it's not good for everybody, it's kind of a particular deal, your list is going to help you. If you have a sizable list, you'll have people on that list, and especially as you kind of manicure it, that you'll know this is the kind of deal that they want. You'll have some people who are realtors and contractors and have their own cash, and they want certain kinds of property. So if that's the case, then you know, here's a good one, that guy's going to take it. What if it's a rental? What if it's a $30,000 house? Who wants those? That list can be very, very important. At the same time, here's why it's not that important. If I showed you a deal right now where you would make $25,000 net profit even after you borrowed the money, how many people in the room would be interested? Let's say you'd only have to put 50 grand into the renovation, you borrow the money, and in the end you'd make 25 grand. How many people? Okay, so that's why a list isn't really that important. So if you've got one that you can just say, it's a cherry, pretty easy. But they're not all cherries. All right, let's talk about marketing. So who are you looking for to sell this deal to? You're looking for flippers, potentially landlords, and sometimes homeowners. Negotiating, we can't go into negotiating, but negotiating is going to happen. If you're not a good negotiator, if you're not comfortable and you want to be a wholesaler, you've got something to work on. You're going to be negotiating to buy it and negotiating to sell it. Something else that's important with that C investor is a proof of funds. You don't want to get a good contract and somebody say, I'll take it, and they sign an assignment agreement and they're not able to close. That can be devastating, and you can tick a lot of people off. And then I have a question. Does anybody know what reverse wholesaling is?
That's where you're the buyer instead of seller.
No.
My guess.
You just
Reverse wholesale.
Yeah, you just find the buyers first, and then back out what they want, and then you go find the deals.
Exactly. So you find the buyer first. It's like you're taking an order. And then you go back and you look for the deal. And if you're marketing and looking for deals, then it's just a matter of time. It's kind of like if you own a used car lot. Somebody says, hey, I want a something Camaro. Well, I don't have one, but eventually I'm going to come across one. All right. Let's talk about an assignment agreement versus a double closing. We're still in wholesaling, and we're talking about you have the contract. Do you assign it to the C buyer, or should you buy it from the A buyer and then resell it to the C buyer. So here are the pros to using an assignment agreement. First of all, if you don't understand what I'm saying, please be brave and tell me. Can I move on, or do I need to go over this again? And it is perfectly fine. You guys all right? All right, so the assignment agreement. You're assigning the contract versus buying it and reselling it. The good side is it's simple. There's no settlement cost to you as the wholesaler, and you're not on record at all. The downside, although it's legal, your assignment fee may cause the investor, C investor, or the seller to feel like you're making too much money, and it puts your deal at risk. So I know people who just have a rule of thumb. If I'm going to make over $10,000, I double close on it. I don't think that's a good rule of thumb. I think you just need to know what's going on. So if you can understand the seller and you can understand the buyer and just gauge it on that, I've had many, many times where both ends, people didn't care. Buyers just write a check. Actually, that $63,000 one, right after settlement, we just sat down, wrote it out, didn't care. But think about it from the seller's perspective. If you're sitting around the settlement table and they recognize that you put it under contract for 40 with them, and then the other guy at the table who they didn't know anything about is buying it for 80, they feel like you just ripped them off. So there's a couple things here. Is it legal? Yes. Is that seller getting what they bargained for? Yes. But do you want them to feel like that? No. So what can you do? You can double close it. Or you can have an agreement with that C buyer to keep that transaction off of the settlement statement so they don't know about it. And for those of you who are kind of new to this, you're going, wow, that guy's talking about how to cheat people out of their money. And you're right. Screw that. No, really. Here's the bargain for them. The bargain for them is they're only selling you the property that discounted because they're in a tight situation. And for them, the trade-off of having a sure sale by that date, they're getting that much money, is the reason they're doing it. And if you can capitalize on that, good for you.
Right.
Just don't try to capitalize on it at their risk and have the deal fall apart and you really can't honor your original agreement. That's the part that gets messed up. All right, so here's the double closing pros. The investors see and the seller don't see your assignment fee. And the cons are double recording fees, your title insurance costs to buy it, possibly your property insurance, double attorney fees, transfer tax paid twice, and you're on the chain of title. Co-wholesaling. If you need to liquidate a property or a contract, you might need to bring somebody into your deal to help with the wholesale transaction. In other words, you've got a deal locked up, but you don't have the buyer's list and you're not having any luck selling it to a C buyer. You could tag somebody in who's been doing it for a while, who has a lot of contacts, and basically split the profit with them. Let them show you how, let them do the work for you, and split the profit. Better than letting it go to waste. So what you can do is you can assign a portion of your rights to that deal to somebody else. So if I have it under contract, I can assign half of it to Tom, and now Tom has the right, because he has ownership in it now, to go out and try to sell it to his list and his contacts. He has the legal right to do that. And here are some samples of how each person would get paid typically. And this is not in stone. This isn't in like the investor's Bible. This is just my opinion on what I've seen over the years. So if somebody brings you, as a qualified wholesaler, a deal, and it's really just a lead. Here's a hot lead. That's worth about a third of the profit. Another third is analyzing that deal, negotiating it, putting it under contract. Another third would be to find the end buyer. So if you already have a contract and it's good to go, you might pay that wholesaler a third to have them bring a buyer for you. If they need to negotiate and do the contract, it could be 2/3. So, and these are just general kind of numbers. All right, so here's a financial example of a wholesale. Let's say you make 10 grand, because so far you might be thinking, wow, there's like no risk in this. Super simple. I got a contract, I sell it, make some money, and that's it. So in this case, let's say it's 10 grand. And look, if you go to somebody's seminar and they teach you about how great wholesaling is and how easy it is and to pay for their system, be very careful, because there's a big part of this that takes a lot of time and a lot of money before you get that contract in your hand. An assignment fee, 10 grand. But what comes out of that? Your cost of leads, your mailing campaigns, your call handling, the evaluating of those deals, the negotiating of those deals, all the deposits that you could potentially have out, and whatever other expenses there are. Now, how many people here market for deals on a regular basis? Okay, so is it unheard of to spend $3,000 a month on marketing? Head shaking. What about 5 grand? Like, you could easily be spending 5 grand a month on marketing, very easily. Just on the cost of the leads and the mailing and the call handling. I mean, if you're really sending a lot of mail out, you need to have people in place, because you couldn't do it. So some people think wholesalers make a ton of money, and if they're running their business well, sure. But there are so many expenses in that business that it gets scary sometimes. I can remember being over $25,000 out in marketing in a dry spell, and man, you're thinking everything. You know, what if it doesn't happen? You know, what if my next deal doesn't come?
What's the deposit? Is that the check that you give to the person to put down?
The deposits, right. So
What's the most you should put down? It varies?
Really it does. I would say $100 at the least.
What if they say 500?
And you want the deal, do it. If they said 5,000, you know, it just really depends. You can do it with 0. It's not illegal. It's harder if it gets challenged, if there's no deposit. $5, $10. I've done that many, many times. But really, it's a more stable agreement if you've got a good deposit. Bill, is that fair?
Yeah.
He's going to correct me in a few minutes. All right, so what is your net profit really? It's kind of hard to say, but it's certainly not 10 grand. All right, any questions about wholesaling before we quickly move into flipping?